Every Sunday before the roosters called, a mother tied a basket of bread onto her head and walked 10 miles barefoot to the market in the next village. And the same rich man in the black SUV watched her do it week after week and drove right past. Then one Sunday in the middle of the dry season, he did something that could have cost him his family name, something no man of his standing was ever supposed to do. Because what he saw in that woman had touched a wound he had buried for 25 years, a wound he was finally ready to open. Every Sunday started the same way. 4 in the morning, before the sky had color, before the village of Keteola remembered how to breathe. Adaeze Okafor woke without a clock. Her body had learned the hour on its own, the way it had learned everything else, since her husband was buried under the mango tree behind their compound. She lay still for one full breath. She let herself have that. Then she rose. In the next room, her daughter Chinwe was already awake, 6 years old, and she almost never cried in the morning. She only waited. She watched the doorway until her mother came through it, and when Adaeze appeared, the child's whole face opened up like a hibiscus at sunrise. "Market day," Chinwe whispered. "Market day," Adaeze answered. And they both knew there was no father to carry the basket this time. Adaeze wrapped Chinwe the way she did every Sunday. First the wrapper cloth around her small shoulders, then the head tie to keep the harmattan dust out of her eyes, and finally the old rubber sandals 2 sizes too big that Chinwe insisted on wearing because they had been her father's gift. Adaeze herself had no sandals left that could survive the road. Hers had split 3 months ago, and there was no money for new ones. Not yet. Not until the bread sold. She lifted the wide woven basket onto her head. 38 loaves inside, wrapped in banana leaves, still warm from the clay oven behind the house. She had risen at midnight to bake them. Her forearms carried the burns to prove it. She balanced the basket the way her mother had taught her, chin high, spine straight, one hand resting lightly on the rim, and she stepped out into the pale gray dawn. The road to Umueze market was 10 miles of red dust and broken stone. In the wet season, it turned into a river of mud that swallowed motorcycles whole. In the dry season, which was now, it turned into a griddle that cooked the soles of your feet by 9 in the morning. Adaeze walked it barefoot because a woman cannot balance 38 loaves on her head while worrying about split sandals. Her feet had grown thick and dark and cracked at the heels. They were the feet of a woman who had walked her own way for a very long time. Chinwe walked beside her, small hand curled into her mother's wrapper. She could not carry a basket yet, but she could carry something more important. She could count. 1, she said at the baobab tree. 2, at the crossroads where the church bell had rusted silent. She counted the mile markers out loud, slow and even, and somehow it made her mother's neck lighter. Adaeze never told her that. She only let her count. At the 3rd mile, her shoulders began to burn. Not from the heat, from the weight settling into her spine the way it always did around this hour. She did not stop. Stopping meant balancing the basket back down onto her head from a resting position, and every fresh lift cost her more than the walk itself. So she kept moving. Left foot, right foot, on the packed red earth, past the compounds where roosters were only now beginning to argue with the sun. At the 5th mile, the black SUV passed her for the first time. She heard the engine before she saw it, a low, expensive growl that did not belong on this road. She stepped to the side without looking up. The vehicle rolled past in a small cloud of dust and stopped 50 yards ahead. The window came down. A man's face turned toward her in the mirror. She kept walking. The window went back up. The SUV drove on. People saw her. People did not stop. The market at Adaeze was where the money was. In her own village, nobody had money on a Sunday. Everyone was either at the small church on the hill or at home, nursing what little food they had left from Saturday. But Adaeze was a junction town. Traders came through from Onitsha and Aba. They had cash in their pockets and hunger in their bellies, and they paid double for warm bread wrapped in banana leaves that tasted like it had been baked by somebody's mother, because it had been. Adaeze had learned this the hard way after her husband, Emeka, died. He had been a driver on the Enugu route. A tanker had swerved on a rainy night, and the roof of his little bus had folded in around him. And that had been the end of the man who used to sing to Chinwe until she fell asleep. There had been no insurance. There had been no savings. There had been only the debt he had borrowed from his cousin, Namdi, to fix the bus the month before. And Namdi had come to the compound 3 days after the funeral to remind her of it. That was the kind of family she had married into. She had sold the bus for parts. She had sold her wedding gold. She had kept the clay oven because the oven was the only thing standing between Chinwe and true hunger. And she had started to bake. 38 loaves every Saturday night, 10 miles every Sunday morning. And if she sold them all by 2 in the afternoon, she came home with enough to eat for the week and put a small coin into the tin under the mattress. The tin was for Chinwe's school. The tin was slow, but the tin was real. And on the days the tin got a coin, Adaeze slept better than on the days it did not. The rains had been poor last season. Flour cost more this year. Yeast cost more. Firewood cost more. Everything cost more, except the bread. The bread had to stay at the price the market would pay, because the traders at Adaeze had learned her price, and if she raised it, they would simply walk 2 stalls down to Mama Ifioma, whose bread was drier but a little cheaper. So Adaeze absorbed every increase in her own body. She ate less, she slept less, she walked faster. And on the days her back gave out around the 7th mile, she smiled at Chinwe and pretended it was a joke, and she kept going. She had never asked anyone for help, not once. Not from Namdi, who watched her from across the compound and waited for her to fail so he could take the house. Not from her own brothers, who had moved to Lagos and forgotten the way home. Not from the church, whose pastor had once looked at her wrapper and said, "Sister, God will provide," in a voice that meant, "Please do not come here for money." She had learned early that a woman with a dead husband and a living child is a woman that people either use or avoid. So she had chosen the third path. She had chosen to owe no one anything. The man in the black SUV had a name, though almost nobody in Keteola knew it. Obinna Adekunle Roberts, 53 years old. A man whose surname had been printed on the sides of oil tankers and shopping malls across 3 states. He was the kind of rich that does not know its own weight. He had grown up in a house with marble floors in Ikoyi, been sent to school in London at 14, and had returned at 30 to inherit his father's construction empire with the reluctance of a man being handed a crown he had never asked to wear. He was in Keteola for one reason. His mother, Adaora, was 91 years old and dying, and she had insisted on dying in the village where she had been born, not in the marble house in Ikoyi. So every Sunday for the last 4 months, Obinna had driven the 4 hours from Enugu to sit at her bedside, hold her thin hand, and listen to her repeat the same 3 stories from her childhood until she fell asleep against her pillow. Then he had climbed back into the SUV and driven home. And every Sunday for 4 months, On the road out of the village, his headlights had caught the same shape. A woman with a basket, walking, a small girl beside her. The first time, he had not registered them. People walked. It was a village, not his business. He kept both hands on the wheel and the air conditioning on high, and he drove past. But the shape kept appearing, and a man who has driven the same road for 16 Sundays notices when something repeats. He started to see the details, even though he told himself not to. The way she balanced the basket without touching it after the second mile. The way she never once looked at the SUV as it passed. The way her feet, bare on the red dust, had a rhythm that never broke, even when a stone caught her heel and made her flinch. The way the child beside her counted out loud. He rolled down the window one Sunday just to hear it. 6, the little girl was saying. 7. Something in his chest, something he had walled off decades ago, took a small step forward. Adaeze Roberts had a wall in his chest too. And behind that wall was a name. Ngozi, his younger sister. Ngozi, who had wanted to be a nurse. Ngozi, who had walked to school every morning of her childhood while their father's driver ferried Obina to the private academy across town in a chauffeured Peugeot. Ngozi, who had asked once, only once, if she could ride with him. And Obina, 12 years old and full of the small cruelty of boys who have been told they are important, had said no. He had said the driver was only for him. He had said she was embarrassing. She had walked. And she had kept walking, every day, in the sun and in the rain, because their father, a man who believed in hardening his daughters and softening his sons, had thought it built character. Ngozi had died of a fever at 19, 3 weeks before she was to leave for nursing school. And Obina had never taken back the ride he had refused her. He drove past Adaeze every Sunday and told himself she was not his problem. He was a busy man. He had a company. He had a dying mother. He had responsibilities the size of buildings. What was one woman on a road? What was one basket? "Don't get involved," said the wall. And for 16 Sundays, Adaeze Roberts listened. The 17th Sunday, the harmattan came in hard. The wind carried Sahara dust in a red haze that turned the sun into a blood orange low in the sky. Visibility on the road dropped to about 50 yards. Obina drove slowly, headlights on in the middle of the morning, and that was when he saw her clearly for the first time. Really saw her. She was halfway between the 6th and 7th mile markers, and she was going down. A goat had bolted across the road, spooked by a motorbike, and Adaeze had stepped sideways to avoid it. Her right foot had come down on a broken bottle half buried in the dust. He saw her whole body twist. He saw the basket tilt. He saw her free arm shoot out, not to catch herself, but to catch the child, pulling Chinwe against her hip in a movement that was pure reflex, pure mother. She hit the ground hard on her left side. The basket flew. 38 loaves of bread rolled out across the red dust, and her right foot was bleeding into the dirt. And she did not make a sound. Obina's foot came off the accelerator without a conscious decision. The SUV coasted to a stop 20 yards past her. He sat there for a long moment with both hands on the wheel, and his heart doing something it had not done in a very long time. In the rearview mirror, he watched her check the child first. He watched her wipe Chinwe's face with the corner of her wrapper. And only then, only after the girl was fine, did she plant one hand in the dust and begin to gather the bread back into the basket, one loaf at a time, on hands and knees on the road. Something cracked inside the wall in his chest. He felt it happen. A hairline split in 25 years of careful masonry. His hand moved toward the door handle before his brain could stop it. Then the other voice came, the one that always came. Don't get involved. She will not want your pity. Your name is on buildings. If you give this woman money, tomorrow her village will line the road with baskets. You cannot save everyone. You cannot save anyone. You could not even save Ngozi. The wind gusted. The dust reddened. And Obinna Adekunle Roberts, a man who had signed contracts worth billions of naira without blinking, sat frozen in a stopped SUV on a village road, unable to open a door. He pressed his forehead against the steering wheel. He counted to 10. He looked up. She was already back on her feet, basket balanced again, blood drying on her heel. Chinwe's hand tucked back into her wrapper. She was walking. He watched her get smaller in the mirror. He put the SUV in gear. He drove home. He did not sleep that night. The next Sunday he came prepared. He told himself it meant nothing. He told himself he had simply overpacked, the way rich men do, and there was extra water and extra fruit and a first aid kit and a pair of women's sandals in a plain plastic bag on the passenger seat. He told himself he would leave them at the roadside somewhere she would find them and drive on, and that would be the end of it. He saw her at the 4th mile. He slowed the SUV. He pulled ahead of her by 100 yards. He stopped, got out, and set the plastic bag down at the base of a baobab tree where the road curved. He did not turn around. He got back in and drove on. In the mirror, he watched her reach the tree, pause, look at the bag, look at the road ahead, look at the bag again, and then keep walking without touching it. She left it there. He drove the rest of the way home with his jaw locked so tight his teeth ached. He had misunderstood something. He had thought this was about her needing what he had. It was not. It was about him needing to give it in a way that did not cost him anything real. She had seen that. She had seen him from 100 yards away without ever looking up. The Sunday after that, he tried again. This time, he waited for her by the tree. He got out of the SUV. He stood beside it in his tailored trousers on the red dust, and he waited. When she came around the curve, she saw him. Her steps slowed. Chinwe's hand tightened in her wrapper. Adaeze did not stop. She kept walking, straight past him, eyes fixed forward, basket steady on her head. He said, "Good morning, madam." She said nothing. She walked on. He got back in the SUV. He drove home. His hands would not stop shaking on the wheel. He was not used to being unseen. He had been many things in his life, but never invisible. And this small woman with cracked heels had just looked through him, as if he were made of the harmattan dust itself. The 3rd Sunday, he did the only thing he could think of. He got out of the SUV, and when she came around the curve, he did not stand in her path. He stood beside the road, and as she passed, he simply said, "My sister's name was Ngozi. She used to walk too. I never once let her ride." His voice broke on the last word. He had not said his sister's name out loud in 25 years. Adaeze stopped walking. She did not turn her head. She stood very still in the middle of the road, the basket motionless on her head, Chinwe silent beside her. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the dry grass. Then she said, without looking at him, "What is it you want from me, sir?" And Obinna, for the first time in his adult life, answered a question honestly. "Nothing," he said. "I want to give you a ride to the market. That is all. I want to give you the ride I never gave her." She turned her head then and looked at him. Really looked at him. And she saw a man in expensive trousers standing on a village road, with tears he was not allowed to cry sitting at the corners of his eyes. She saw a boy of 12 inside a man of 53. She saw the wound. She said, "I do not take charity, sir." He said, "I am not offering charity. I am asking a favor. Let me carry your bread this one time, so I can sleep tonight." She looked at Chinwe. Chinwe looked back at her, wide-eyed, small. Adaeze looked at the road ahead, the 4 miles still to walk in the rising heat with a bleeding heel that had not fully healed from the week before. And she did something she had not done since Emeka died. She said, "Yes." The inside of the SUV was cold, the way she had heard air conditioning was cold, but had never felt for herself. Chinwe sat on the leather seat and did not move a muscle, as if she were afraid of leaving a print. Adaeze held the basket on her lap because she could not bring herself to set it on the seat. Obinna drove slowly, both hands on the wheel, and he did not speak for the first 2 miles. He was afraid of saying the wrong thing. He was afraid of saying anything at all. Finally, Chinwe, who was 6 and had not yet learned to be afraid of important men, said, "Uncle, why is your car so cold?" Obinna laughed. It came out of him like something surprised. "Because I forgot," he said, "that the outside was so hot." He turned the air conditioning down. Chinwe pressed her small face against the window and watched the mile markers go by faster than they had ever gone by in her life. Adaeze watched her daughter's face and something in her own chest, something she had held tight for 2 years, loosened one small notch. At the market, Obinna helped her carry the basket to her spot in the trading row. He did it clumsily, the way a man who has never carried a basket does it, and Mama Ifoma at the next stall stared at him with her mouth open. Adaeze set up her cloth. She arranged her loaves. Obinna stood there uncertain, a rich man in the middle of a Sunday market who did not know what came next. Adaeze looked up at him. She said, "You do not have to stay." He said, "I would like to buy your bread." She said, "How many?" He said, "All of it." She went still. She said, "Sir, that is not a favor. That is charity again." He said, "It is not charity if I eat it." She said, "You cannot eat 38 loaves." He said, "No, but my mother's household can. She has 40 people working for her in the village. Cooks, cleaners, drivers, nurses. They eat bread every morning. I would like to buy your bread every Sunday from now on. At the market price, not 1 naira more, not 1 naira less. And I would like to send my driver to collect it so that you do not have to walk the 10 miles unless you want to." She looked at him a very long time. She said, "Why?" He said, "Because my mother is dying. And when she is gone, I want to be a man she would have been proud of. And right now, madam, I am not." Adaeze looked down at her 38 loaves wrapped in banana leaves. She looked at Chinwe, who was watching a butterfly land on the edge of the cloth. She looked at her own cracked feet. She said, "The market price." He said, "The market price." She said, "Then yes." The arrangement began the following Sunday, and the village noticed within a month. Mama Ifeoma noticed first. She was not pleased. She went to Namdi, Adaeze's late husband's cousin, and she told him what she had seen. A rich man in a black SUV. A widow. A regular arrangement. Namdi's eyes narrowed. He had been waiting for 2 years for Adaeze to slip in a way he could use. He came to the compound on a Tuesday evening. He sat down under the mango tree where Emeka was buried, and he said, "Sister, we need to talk." He said the whole village was talking. He said a young widow should not be entertaining strange men in expensive cars. He said it was bringing shame on the family. He said, in the tone of a man doing her a great favor, that perhaps she should marry him instead. It would settle everything: the house, the debt, the child, the shame. He was, after all, family. Adaeze listened to him without moving. When he was finished, she said one sentence. "Namdi, when Emeka died, I asked you for 1 bag of rice. You said no. You now say you would like to be my husband? Please leave my compound." He left. He did not leave quietly. He went to the elders. He went to the pastor. He said Adaeze was selling herself. He said Chinwe was being corrupted. He said the house, which had been Emeka's, and by tradition therefore Namdi's, should be returned to the family. The elders called a meeting. Adaeze was summoned. She walked to the meeting in her only good wrapper, her back straight, her head high. And she stood before 6 old men in plastic chairs and told them the truth. She told them about Emeka's debt. She told them about the bread. She told them about the 10 miles. She told them about the man in the SUV and his sister named Ngozi, and the mother dying in the village, and the arrangement at the market price. And then she said, "If any of you had ever brought me 1 bag of rice, we would not be here. I owe this family nothing. I owe this man nothing. I owe my daughter everything. And I will not marry a man who watched me bury my husband and asked for money 3 days later." One elder, the oldest one, whose name was Papa Iheanacho, and who had known Adeze's father, looked at Namdi for a long moment. Then he looked at Adaeze. Then he said, "The house belongs to the widow and the child. This meeting is over." And that was the end of Namdi. Obina's mother died in the 8th month. She died on a Sunday morning while he was on the road driving out of the village. He got the call at the 5th mile marker, right where the baobab tree curved the road. He pulled over. He sat in the SUV with the phone in his hand, and he cried in a way he had not cried since Ngozi. When he could see again, he looked up, and there in the distance, walking toward him on the red dust, was Adaeze with her basket, and Chinwe with her count. She saw the SUV stopped. She saw him through the windshield. She did something she had never done before. She stepped off the road. She set the basket down at the base of the baobab. She walked to the driver's side window. She did not speak. She simply reached in through the open window and put her hand on his shoulder. He wept into her wrist. She let him. When he was quiet again, she said, "She is with your sister now." He said, "How did you know?" She said, "Sir, you told me the first day." "You have been carrying 2 graves. Now you carry 1. She walked back to her basket. She lifted it onto her head. She continued to the market. He drove home to bury his mother. At the funeral, in the marble house in Ikoyi, among the governors and the bishops and the men in expensive agbadas, one woman came whom nobody recognized. She wore a simple black wrapper. She held a small girl by the hand. She had not been on the list. The security men stopped her at the gate. Obina saw her from the balcony. He came down the marble steps 2 at a time. He walked past his cousins, past his business partners, past a state governor, and he took Adaeze's hand and he led her inside as his guest. In the great hall of the house where he had grown up, he introduced her to no one, and to everyone, simply as the woman who taught me how to be a son. Chinwe ate jollof rice on a marble bench and watched a chandelier the size of a car above her head. After the funeral, Obina offered her money. A lot of money. Enough to buy a shop in Umueze. Enough to send Chinwe to any school in Nigeria. Enough to never walk another mile in her life. Adaeze listened. She thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, she came to see him at the guest house where he was staying in the village. She said, "Sir, I have thought about your offer, and I will accept a portion of it, but not for me." He waited. She said, "There are 11 other widows in this village. Their husbands died in the tanker accidents, in the mines, in the fields. They have children. They have no bread. I would like to build a bakery. A real one, not my clay oven. Big enough for all of us to bake in. And I would like to buy a small truck so that on Sundays, one of us drives and none of us walks. And I would like you to buy the bread, all of it, every Sunday, at the market price. For your mother's household, and for the other houses of your family and your friends. Because there is enough bread in Keteola to feed Lagos, if only somebody would buy it. That is what I would like. Not for me, for the 11 of us, and for our children." Obina sat very still. He said, "Adaeze, that is not a portion of what I offered. That is more." She said, "No, sir. What you offered was a gift for 1 woman. What I am asking for is a business for 12. It will cost less in the end, and it will last longer." He looked at her for a long time. He said, "You should have run my company." She said, "Sir, I am running one." He agreed to everything. The bakery opened 9 months later, on the road out of Keteola, halfway between the village and the baobab tree. It was a low, white building with 3 ovens and a wide, covered veranda where the women rolled dough in the cool of the morning. 12 widows worked there. 23 of their children went to school on the profits. Chinwe was one of them. She wore a uniform with a small blue collar, and she carried a school bag that had never belonged to anyone else. The truck was a small blue Toyota, second-hand but well-maintained. On Sunday mornings, one of the widows drove it to Umueze, and the bread arrived warm, and the traders bought it faster than it had ever sold before, because now there was more of it, and it came with a name printed on the banana leaves. The name was Ngozi's. Obina had suggested it in a low voice one afternoon, and Adaeze had simply nodded. Adaeze still walked to the market on Sundays, not because she had to, but because she chose to. She walked with the other widows now, 10 of them in a line along the red dust road at dawn, singing softly, their feet in new sandals, the truck rolling slowly ahead of them with the bread inside. Chinwe walked beside her mother and counted the mile markers out of habit more than need. And on the 7th Sunday of the 2nd year, at the baobab tree where the road curved, they came upon a small carved bench that had not been there the week before. It faced the road. It was made of good wood, sanded smooth. A brass plate on the back had 2 words on it, "For Ngozi." Adaeze touched the plate with the tips of her fingers. She did not speak. She walked on. None of this was a miracle. That part matters. Emeka did not come back. Ngozi did not come back. Obina's mother did not come back. Cerebral scars from a childhood of being sent to the private academy while a sister walked to the local school did not simply vanish. What happened was smaller, and if you understand it, so much bigger. A woman who had owed nobody anything learned that being owed nothing is not the same as being loved. A man who had spent 25 years walled up inside a name printed on buildings learned that his name was not what made him a man. His willingness to stop on a road for a woman he did not know, that was what made him a man. And 12 widows who had been carrying their own baskets in silence for years learned that their silence had been a habit, not a virtue. Obina did not marry Adaeze. That was never the story. He was old enough to be her father, and she was not a woman who needed a husband to be complete. He became something rarer than a husband. He became a friend. He came to the village every second Sunday for the rest of his life. He sat on the bench under the baobab. He drank water she poured for him. He watched Chinwe grow up. He paid for her schooling all the way through university, where she studied medicine and became a doctor, and returned to Keteola to open a small clinic 3 doors down from the bakery. On the day the clinic opened, Chinwe stood at the front, and she did not thank Obina. She thanked her mother. She said, "My mother walked 10 miles every Sunday so that I would never have to. And when I could have ridden, she taught me that walking with others is worth more than riding alone." Adaeze wept in the front row without shame, and Obina wept in the second row, and neither of them tried to hide it. Here is what that whole dry season taught. A rich man in a black SUV, a widow with a basket, a girl who counted mile markers. You do not need to be poor to change a life, and you do not need to be rich either. Obina had money, but money was not what fixed anything. What fixed things was the moment he stopped on a road and said the name he had not said in 25 years, out loud in front of a stranger. Dignity is not a check somebody writes for you. Dignity is a road you are allowed to walk with your head high, and a bench somebody builds so that when you are tired, you have somewhere to sit. Dignity is a rich man asking a poor woman for a favor instead of offering her charity. It is a poor woman refusing money and asking for a bakery. It is 12 widows in a line along a red dust road at dawn, singing, because none of them has to sing alone anymore. Systems, the big cold machines that forget people. They do not change on their own. Roads do not sprout benches. Villages do not build bakeries. Buses do not stop for widows unless somebody chooses to stop them. Obina had a wheel and a choice. Adaeze had a basket and a choice. Most of us have that much to give, somewhere, to someone. I want to step out of the story for a moment. Just me talking to you now. Because you have earned that after sitting with these people this long. What you just heard is a dramatized story. Adaeze, Obina, Chinwe, Ngozi. They are characters I built to carry something true. I want to be honest with you about that. But the bones of it are real. Painfully real. Right now, tonight, in villages across our continent, there are widows walking 10 miles with baskets on their heads because a husband died on a bad road and a system did not catch her. There are rich men in tinted cars driving past them because it is easier to look away than to remember a sister they failed. That part I did not invent. I only gave it names. So let me leave you with something you can actually do instead of just feelings. If there is a widow on your street, do not offer her pity. Offer her business. Buy her bread. Buy her tomatoes. buy her fish. Do not haggle. Pay her price. If you have money and you see a woman working herself into the ground, do not give her charity. Ask her what she would build if she had the tools. Then help her build it. And if you are the one carrying the basket, know this: your walk is not invisible. Somebody is watching. And one day, a man in a black SUV will stop on the road, and he will say the name he has been carrying for 25 years. And you will have the power in that moment to decide whether the world gets a little kinder or a little colder. Choose kinder. It costs you nothing, and it changes everything. Thank you for staying to the end of this one. It means more than you know. If Adaeze and Chinwe and Obina moved something in you, do me a favor. Subscribe so the next story finds you. Give this a like and share it with someone you love. Someone who needs the reminder that one small act, one refusal to drive past, can change a life. I will see you on the next.